Hi friends, Catherine Korostoff here, and I would like to welcome Jeffrey Henning. Jeffrey is the president of ResearchScape, and he's also a curriculum partner here at Research Rockstar. Jeffrey recently taught a course for us in January of 2018 on NPS in the context of building a great customer experience program. And it was the first time we launched the course together, and it went really well. So we are adding a second session coming up in April. So I've invited Jeffrey here today to give us a few teasers about what students can expect in the course. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm looking forward to teaching the class again. So when people talk about customer experience, a lot of people default to the Net Promoter Score as the simplest measure, the way they're going to start their research. And I loved the Net Promoter Score when it first came out because it was so simple and easy to explain. But unfortunately, as other people have tried to validate the research that was done in the book, The Ultimate Question, they've basically disproven it and found lots of issues with it. So there's 10 that I talk about in the class that I go through in detail, from the fact that the scale, so Schneider, Barrett, Thomas, and Krosnick tested 4 scales, and the 0 to 10 scale, which is an 11-point scale, was the worst of the scales that they tested. They found that how much you like a company was a better predictor of recommendations than asking people how many recommendations, how likely they were to recommend. It wasn't predictive of loyalty. Segments were counter to how the question is asked. So one of the things you'll find when you ask the follow-up question, why wouldn't you recommend, is people will say, well, I don't really recommend operating systems, or I work for the government, I'm not allowed to make recommendations. You'll often see a disconnect between the interpretation of their 0 to 10 and their comments. People who are passive actually, seem to be like they'd be promoters, and people who would be listed as detractors aren't. So the segments often don't work. And usually when we do analyses of actual customer behavior, we'll find that the segments are less predictive than just the 0 to 10 point numbers. The net score calculation loses information. Bob Hayes found that out, and then Randy Hansen at Market Strategies pointed out that you really need much larger sample sizes because of the net score calculation. It's always better to ask multiple questions and index them in some way. So that's a general rule of thumb, and that's true of the Net Promoter Score. And it's less accurate than the American Customer Satisfaction Index. And finally, it's easy to game, and that was one that resonated the most with the students in the first class. Was most people have experienced, going somewhere, getting some service, and being told, please rate us a 9 or 10. If you can't rate us a 9 or 10, tell us why you can't. So I go through each of those in detail. Now, the interesting thing is, if you're working for a corporate research department and you're going to have that conversation with management, or you're working with a client, the fact that you go through those 10 issues probably isn't going to change anyone's mind. So unfortunately, a lot of organizations are like, well, we use NPS, or our competitors use NPS, or the CEO loves NPS, and so that's what we're going to do. And so there's an emotional cognitive behavior called Backfire, which is a defense mechanism to avoid cognitive dissonance. So there's been a lot of research in behavioral economics and market research. There's some great classes that Catherine has on that. And one of the things as you try to tangle consumer behavior is Backfire. So confidence in your knowledge is actually inversely correlated to your actual knowledge. And it turns out that facts don't really have the power to change people's minds. That's not how minds are changed. So this great quote from Joe Keohane is, like an underpowered antibiotic, facts make misinformation stronger. So the fact that there's 10 good reasons not to use NPS, some of them backed up by academic research, is probably not going to convince anyone. So instead what we do is we advocate stealing a page from Microsoft in the late 1990s when they were trying to catch up with Netscape on the internet, and Sun for Java. They had this strategy called embrace, extend, and extinguish. And I found that this actually works really well with customer experience work. So the embrace is to say, look, absolutely we're going to include NPS in this survey. And then the extend is, so we can put the NPS results in context, we're going to ask other questions about satisfaction, loyalty, and customer experience. I've never got pushback on that But if you read the ultimate question, he's really steering you towards asking, two questions, the NPS question and then an open-ended follow-up. But no one has ever complained about asking more questions. It's logical. We're doing a survey, we're going to ask more than 2 questions. So that's how we extend it. And then what we do is we look at proprietary measures for inspiration, but we modernize them. The American Customer Satisfaction Index is great, but it dates back now to 1993. It uses some outdated wording. It's better for telephone research than web research. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the ECSI, the NCSB, Temkin, and Forrester measures, and take the best of all those and distill them down to a 13-question instrument, 12 closed-ended questions, 1 open-ended question. And from that, you're going to get much better customer experience results than relying on Net Promoter Score alone.
I love this, and this really intersects with a couple of things that that I know I'm really passionate about here, and we talk about in our classes here at Research Rockstar. First of all, when we talk about questionnaire design in general, we always try to emphasize to the students the importance of using validated measures and not just winging it with your questionnaire design and your choice of scales. And so I love that you are really pulling so many great citations and research and tested instruments. You're actually using instruments that are known and are tested. And I think especially for some students who may be newer into our field, they may not always be aware, but that's always our goal. We don't just want to use either a battery of questions that we think might give us a good construct. We want to use things that have been tested before whenever possible. And that's really going to help with your overall data quality. But one other thing that you talked about that I want to go back to that is another key thing that I know comes up in a lot of classes is how different things work in different product categories. Any kind of research technique, NPS or otherwise, that might work well in, say, CPG may or may not also work in B2B markets or in other types of, might work well in, for products of a certain price range and not for others. So when you talk, for example, about some of the challenges, the 10 challenges, do you think that some of those do apply perhaps more to some product categories or populations of interest than others?
Yeah, one of the things we talk about is different types of business. So if you're a startup with maybe a freemium model, you really care about advocacy. You need people who are talking about your product or service to other people. And so really that is a great measure for you to look at. If you're a established firm, we use a cell phone example, so saturated market where it's more about converting other customers, then you're really interested in retention. You can't afford to lose customers, it's too expensive to win them, so you're interested in retention measures. So we do talk in the class about how different measures work in different environments, and again that kind of goes against the ultimate question. Basically, there isn't one question that fits for every situation, and that's what the reason we use these 12 questions is because we'll often find that different questions work better for different industries, for different types of relationships. If it's like a cell phone where you're renewing the plan versus if it's a category where every time you're making a new purchase, those all affect the questions that are going to be most predictive for you.
I love that, and that also ties into when we teach customer satisfaction here. We talk about if this is your first time that your company or the brand that you're doing the work for is doing a customer satisfaction survey project, it can be a really good idea to start with some good, rich qualitative or discovery research as a first phase. So you can really start to think originally and take a fresh look at what are the right measures of loyalty for me. Because like you said, with cell phones, it might be about propensity to renew my contract as opposed to perhaps willingness to recommend to others. So I love those lessons. Those are really excellent points.
Great. And let me just briefly talk about the class. So it's called Customer Experience, NPS and Beyond. It's a 2-day class. So putting NPS in its place in a customer experience program. And we're going to start with the NPS, the documented problems that I talked about in detail, some survey scale best practices, which unfortunately are honored in the breach more than the observance. We'll talk about Backfire and then introduce the strategy. And then day 2, we're going to go through a lot of measures from different organizations. The American Customer Satisfaction Index is great. Little known in the US, but the Norwegian Customer Satisfaction Barometer did a lot of research on the ACSI, what worked and what didn't, tried some different things, and then validated those. And so actually that's been very useful. Forrester, Temkin, there's been a lot of great research that people have published that we can leverage and learn from.
Fantastic. I love that all of this is going to be in this course. And again, thrilled that you're going to offer it for our students again, Jeffrey. So thanks for agreeing to do that. And for people who want to head over to check out the course, it is at training.researchrockstar.com. It is called CX:NPS and Beyond. So I'm showing you a screenshot of what the product page looks like. And we've got all the information here on registration. You can download the agenda and you can purchase the class online. If you do have a group who wants to take the class, there's a contact information link on the same page if you want to ask about group discounts.